Ladies and gentlemen, they got him. We talked about it on Locked On Grizzlies. The idea of Cedric Coward. Can he be a Memphis Grizzly? Well, guess what? He's a Memphis Grizzly now. They got him in the draft. Let's talk about the move and what's next for the Grizzlies coming up here on Locked On Grizzlies.
You are Locked On Grizzlies, your daily Memphis Grizzlies podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, everyone? And welcome back to Locked On Grizzlies. I'm your host today, Damichael Cole, beat writer for the Commercial Appeal right here in Memphis, Tennessee. Thank you guys for tuning in with us on Locked On Grizzlies. We got a lot to talk about today, but before we talk about all these important things that happen, thank you for making Locked On Grizzlies your first listen each and every single day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every single day. It's draft day in Memphis, Tennessee. The first round of the draft is done. Now it's time for the second round. But the first round, in my mind, in my co-host Joe Mullinax's mind, in a lot of you guys' mind, and maybe in some other people's mind, was a success. It was an overwhelming success. The guy that I've talked about, the guy that Joe Mullinax has talked about, the guy that several people have talked about, the Grizzlies went and got him. The Grizzlies landed Cedric Coward in the first round of the NBA draft with the 11th, not 16th, with the 11th overall pick. A strong move by the Grizzlies. We got a lot to talk about in today's show. We're going to talk about the Grizzlies getting Cedric Coward. We're going to talk about the gritty mindset that he possesses. We're going to talk about that. We talked to him, the media did, on a phone conference call. So I got some things to share about what I learned in that conversation with Cedric Coward. And then we're going to talk about Zach Kleiman because he spoke to the media on yesterday as well. What did Zach Kleiman say? What did he share? We're going to talk a lot about that as well. Before we get to that, let's start with the Grizzlies landing Cedric Coward. The number one thing is they didn't land him at 16. The Grizzlies moved up in the draft. They select Cedric Coward with the number 11 overall pick. They trade 2 future second-round picks. They trade the 2028 first-rounder, and they trade the number 16 overall pick. So you gave up a future first. 2028 first-rounder was via the Orlando Magic. So they're already putting the assets that they gained from the Desmond Bane trade to use. So they use that first-round pick, 2 future seconds, and as well as giving up the number 16 overall pick. So that's a lot. But that must tell you what they think about Cedric Coward. And quite frankly, it tells you what me and Joe Mullinax think about Cedric Coward. This is a guy, shout out to the everydayers. Shout out to Locked On Grizzlies everydayers. Some people are going to tune in today because they love the draft. And they're like, hey, well, let's see what Damichael and Joe Mullinax are talking about in terms of the NBA draft. But shout out to those people that tune in with us every day, because if you've been tuning in every day, you know that we've been very high on the idea of drafting Cedric Coward. Now, let's keep it a buck. Let's be honest here. We're gonna be very honest, and we're gonna say this: there is risk to drafting Cedric Coward. There's a lot of risk here. This is a guy who played at Washington State last season. Played 6 games. 6 games at Washington State. Before that, 2 years at Eastern Washington, Division III. Look, quite frankly, when you talk about Cedric Coward, it's simple. This is a guy who hasn't played much high major basketball. You're betting on what you think would have happened after he played those 6 games and how he would have turned out. Remember, when he was drafted, he was committed to Duke. I mean, not when he was drafted, but when he entered the draft. He was committed to Duke University. He was about to go over to Duke and probably put up some really big numbers. But he entered the draft. He goes to the NBA Draft Combine, and he put on a show. He put on a show at the NBA Draft Combine. He goes from this late first-round pick to a guy that's like, hold up, yeah, did y'all see this? 38-inch vertical, 6'6", 7'2" and a quarter wingspan. Like, that wingspan is the equivalent of a lot of centers in the NBA and better than many. This guy has the physical attributes of those standout defenders, those Herb Jones, those Kawhi Leonards, those guys who are just gifted. He has the physical attributes. But let's talk about the idea. The Grizzlies moved up. They gave up a lot, right? I'm okay with what they gave up. We've talked about it on Locked On Grizzlies, and look, my thing was if I didn't understand the idea of trading back, it was either stay put, draft out of this spot. Acquire a player from the league right now and use that pick, or it was straight up. Those were the options to me. And the Grizzlies, in this case, traded up aggressively. I mean, they gave a future first. I didn't see that coming, but hey, you got to do what you got to do, right? And this was the guy that they identified as the guy that they want. Cedric Coward talked about it. He worked out with the Grizzlies as recently as Monday. I mean, that's again, the Desmond Bane trade was June 15th. First round of the draft was June the 25th. You're talking about a short window where the Grizzlies said, we got a first round pick. We got to get active. We got to get active. And the Grizzlies did just that, identifying talent, identifying Cedric Coward, bringing him in for workouts. The Grizzlies were his last workout. He estimated that he had around 25 workouts. He worked out with the Grizzlies. The last part of that workout was Monday. And he was drafted Wednesday. So let's talk about him a little bit. We're going to start with what everyone loves about this guy, and it's the defensive upside. And I'm going to say upside because if you look at his numbers, you look at his offensive rating, his offensive win shares, and things like that. His offensive numbers are actually much more impressive than his defensive numbers. But when you talk about defensively, what impresses us about Cedric Coward is, number one, he has the mentality. We're going to talk about that more in the next segment. We're going to save some of the good stuff for later. But we got to talk about the intangibles and just what he's gifted with right now. We're talking about a guy who's 6'6", pretty much without shoes. So he's probably going to be 6'7" when he walks on the NBA floor, depending on what shoes he wears. And then 7'2.5" wingspan. You're talking about exclusive company with first-round picks. A lot of guys aren't gifted like that. And many of the players who have that type of wingspan end up being really good NBA players. It's kind of a safe bet when you talk about a guy who has a 7'2" wingspan as a wing player. At the end of the day, many of those players automatically are great defenders because of the length, because of their ability to contest shots and then play the passing lanes and things like that. There's tremendous defensive upside here. Again, you go back to his college stats. He played at Eastern Washington, and then he goes on to play, at Washington State. And at Washington State, he only played 6 games. 6 games at Washington State. So it's not like we see him really against much high major competition. So that is if you want to find a reason to be skeptical, because there's a lot to like about Cedric Coward. But if you're one of those people like, man, it can't be this good. Well, Damichael, come on, shoot it to me real. What do I need to know that needs to be worked on? And that is near the top of the list. He's been dominant. His 2-point field goal percentage number is through the roof. I mean, this is a guy who, if you go back to his college career, the entire course of his college career, we're talking about a guy who shot, roughly 38% from three-point range, 38.8%, so really 39% from three-point range. But when you factor in 2-point field goal percentage, 72%. That's not a misprint. That's not a typo. 72 field goal percentage. You're talking about a guy who had a 59.5 field goal percentage throughout his college career, which is 72 games. So, look, there are going to be questions about, okay, can he bring this to the high major level? And that's why we're talking about the offensive upside last. When we talked to him, we're going to talk more about what we talked to him about in the second segment, but he had a conference call with the media, and he talked to us. He said a bunch of things about, being drafted, or whatever the case may be. And one thing stood out to me. He constantly talked about defense. Said, I got this defensive mentality, defense first, all these good things he said about defense. So after he got done with all that, I said, okay, we get it. You bring a lot to the defensive end. What do you add offensively? What should Grizzlies fans expect on the offensive end from Cedric Coward? And the list of things he said was long. Most guys say, hey, I'm going to space the floor for John Morant. I'm going to space the floor for Jaren. I can get open and make some shots. No, not Cedric Coward. He said, I'm a good cutter. And yeah, he said something about spacing the floor. He said he's a good movement shooter, which I think we could see more of that. Guys not just shooting off the dribble, shooting off of pin downs, shooting off of different types of screens, shooting off flare screens, whatever the case may be, to get open looks in this system that's going to be created by Tuansi Salo. So, again, I love the pick. I'll say this, and I know, we'll talk about it in the last segment a little bit more when we talk about Zach Kleiman. But I know there are people out there who said, man, Damichael, we've talked over and over again about not being younger. Keep saying we're not going to be younger. We're not going to go younger. And what the Grizzlies do, they move up and draft a 21-year-old player like Damichael. That's not going to help us win a championship. And I get that. I'm not knocking that perspective at all. If you're one of those people, let us know in the comments and we'll chat. We'll chat because my perspective is a little bit more mixed. I get why people are saying, okay, yeah, this pick, it's another young player, whatever the case may be. Why did we move up? We should have, got a veteran. But at the same time, it's not that simple. It's not like you can just, let's go get Cam Johnson. Brooklyn, send us Cam Johnson. It's not that simple. As the dancers like to say, it takes two to tango. So that's just kind of, how that works. But we're going to talk more about Cedric Coward and his mentality. As I mentioned earlier, the local media in Memphis had a phone interview with him. So we're going to talk about how that went and kind of what he said, because I think a lot of you guys are going to like what we heard from Cedric Coward. But before we get to that, today's episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by WayFair. Listen up. There's nothing like stepping into your own outdoor space and feeling like you've escaped to a personal oasis. If you're wanting to update your patio this season, WayFair has made it easy so you can turn it into a space that feels like yours, comfortable, stylish, and ready for summer. WayFair has everything you need to level up your outdoor space. Conversation sets, outdoor bars, fire pits, hot tubs, gazebos, and even the perfect string lights to set the vibe. It's like giving your backyard that resort feel without the price tag. So look, make sure you take advantage of this. And remember, the delivery is free, fast, and totally hassle-free, even with the larger items. And don't wait. Make your outdoor space your dream oasis today with WayFair and enjoy it all summer long. Head to wayfair.com right now to shop a huge outdoor selection. That's WayFair.com. Wait for every style, every home. Make sure you go take advantage of that now over at wayfair.com. The Memphis Grizzlies drafted Cedric Coward. And the first thing that stood out to me is what we've said on the show. Everything that we said has been verified. The Grizzlies will identify a player with a defensive mentality. They will identify a player who's playing on the wing. Guards are cool and all, but they got a bunch of them. Bigs are cool and all, but they got a bunch of them. It's going to be about the wings. They get Cedric Coward. So we got on the phone with Cedric Coward, right? We had, I guess you can say, a phone call interview with him. He was in New York, in Brooklyn, and the local media in Memphis. We were in FedEx Forum, and we're talking to Cedric Coward on the phone. And I tend not to try to overreact to these things, right? Because, everyone gets drafted, you're going to say all the right things, typically. But this guy thoroughly enjoyed what he said. Thoroughly. The defensive mentality. Let's talk about that first, because we've been nibbling and dabbling with it. But the defensive mentality with Cedric Coward, when he spoke about the defensive effort, this was unprovoked, by the way. We were just asking him about, okay, what are you going to add to the Grizzlies? And of course, he talks about bringing a winning mentality. And then he brings up the fact that, I've had to earn my way here. And just because, I'm a lottery pick and things like that, it's not going to change. I got a lot more to prove. And that's what you expect from a guy who, quite frankly, had to work his way up from Division III. This isn't a guy who had it easy. This isn't a guy who, walked into college as one of those 5-star prospects and, had people, handing him roses as soon as he walked on campus. No, he had to earn it. Cedric Coward had to earn it. And guess what? He feels like he has to earn it to the same level as in the NBA. So, again, that gritty mentality. You remember Zach Kleiman at his end of season availability said the Grizzlies want dogs. When I listen to this guy talk, I hear a dog. So again, we pointed out earlier that his last media session, or his last not media session, his last workout was with the Memphis Grizzlies, and in that workout, he talked about it. He described it in the media session with the local media here on the phone, and he talked about the fact that it was competitive, it was all these things. It's like, oh, he was like, we were talking trash. And that's when I was like, oh, yeah, that's a Grizzly right there. Talking a little bit trash, competitive banner. That's what I call it. It's all fun and games. People run with it sometimes, but it's all fun and games. And he was saying, yeah, it was fun. But he kept talking about, getting after it on the defensive end. And then we asked him about Ja Morant and Jaren Jackson Jr., and he said that's one of the best duos in the league. That's what Cedric Coward said. And then he said, he didn't say the word dirty work, but he talked about the ability to play defense around those guys, which is important. So now you're going to get a player who, quite frankly, isn't some huge ego guy, which is important. And I think the Grizzlies, again, the Grizzlies are really good at doing their homework on the character of these players. For the most part, that's been the case with the Grizzlies since I've been here. They did their homework on Cedric Coward from that standpoint. He's very happy with being here. The Grizzlies were one of his top choices overall when you talk about, okay, where do I want to go? And it makes the most sense in terms of where he should land long term. Cedric Coward is one of those got it out of the mud type guys. I think that's the best way to put it. This is a guy who started off at Division III, right? And he just works his way up, gets to Washington State, eventually commits to Duke. Didn't play a game at Duke, but commits to Duke, which shows you just how well regarded he was, as a transfer when he entered the portal, after playing at Washington State. But this guy, he's going to be a great fit for a lot of reasons with the Grizzlies. But I feel like the defensive mentality and just that ability to say, hey, I'm going to do the dirty work. The Grizzlies need gritty guys. You got Ja, you got Jaren. They're going to score a lot of points. Breaking news. But Zach Edey, we've seen it with him. He'll get out there and set that screen for Ja. He'll set that screen, for Jaren. And if guys come mess with him, he's going to be the first one over there and say, that's my teammate. Don't you touch him. And then Jalen Wells, right? He's a little bit quieter. Jalen Wells is a little bit quieter. He's not going to talk like Zach Edey. But guess what? Jalen Wells, go guard LeBron. He'll do it. Jalen Wells, go guard Trae Young. He'll do it. No matter how big, no matter how small, Jalen Wells is going to get out there. He's going to compete. Sometimes we've seen him take blows to the face and all of the in-between. But he gets out there and he competes. This guy, Cedric Coward, gives me that same mentality. Again, Jalen Wells played D2 basketball. Cedric Coward, D3. So these are guys who come from those gritty backgrounds and rise their way up into becoming these, well-regarded prospects. And in that process with Jalen Wells, he didn't lose himself. He was still the same kid from Sonoma State. And in the process with Cedric Coward, you get the same vibes. Like when he was talking to me, he kept referencing the fact that, look, I'm not going to look at this opportunity as, from a super cocky perspective or anything like that. Cedric Coward said, I got more to prove. I got more to prove. So with that being said, I can't wait to see, what happens with him. You remember the big thing with Cedric Coward, we haven't talked about this, is the shoulder injury, right? He played 6 games at Washington State because he hurt his rotator cuff. And I believe before that, they didn't even know it was a rotator injury. They just know it was his shoulder. But eventually, He had to get surgery, all these things, and misses pretty much the rest of the season. And the other thing is he goes on to play in workouts, but the key here is he does one on O work. One on O basically is no contact. Now with the Grizzlies, as he kind of progresses with the Grizzlies, they're going to want to see him get to contact. They're going to want to see him show himself in 5-on-5 action. If he can do that, he'll play in Summer League. If he can't do that, unlikely. Now, I'm looking at the dates, and you say, hey, today is June 26th. Summer League in Salt Lake City starts July 5th. Summer League in Las Vegas, we haven't got the Grizzlies schedule yet, but Summer League in Las Vegas starts July 10th overall. So when you factor all of that in, it's like, okay, you're talking about you don't have a lot of days here for a guy to go from 1-on-0 to 5-on-5. So again, Zach Kleiman said that Cedric Coward is TBD in terms of being available for Summer League. But in my mind, based on what we know, we're talking about a guy who's 1-0. No 3-on-3 yet, no 5-on-5. I'm not optimistic about the idea of seeing Cedric Coward in Summer League. But that's okay, because guess what? I'm optimistic about the idea of him being ready for regular season play. So there is that. But we also talked to Zach Kleiman. Zach Kleiman talked about a lot of things. Desmond Bane, the state of the Grizzlies roster, and Cedric Coward. We're going to talk about all of that up next here on Locked On Grizzlies. But before we talk about that, today's episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by our partners at SKIMS. Look, here's the thing about SKIMS. When I found out SKIMS were making underwear for men, I was intrigued. Like, I've heard so much about their quality from friends and family. Like, man, I got to give it a try, right? And let me tell you, SKIMS lives up to the hype. And I've always had issue with underwears, whether it be fit, comfort, or just finding the right style for me. And SKIMS changed all of that. Their men's line offers something for everyone, from boxer briefs, and you get the classic briefs, all designed with the perfect balance of comfort and style. Make sure you take advantage of that now. Shop SKIMS at skims.com. Let them know that we sent you. After you place your order, select podcast in the survey and select our/my show in the drop-down menu that follows over at SKIMS. Make sure you go take advantage of that right now with SKIMS. The Memphis Grizzlies drafted Cedric Coward, and Zach Kleiman got to talk about it after the draft, because I shouldn't say draft, they acquired. That's the actual official language. They acquired Cedric Coward in the 2025 NBA draft. But Zach Kleiman spoke after the draft, and he was able to speak. The trade, there were parts of the trade that were still being finalized, but he was able to speak about Cedric Coward, the player overall. Had a lot of good things to say about him. You could tell with Zach Kleiman, he didn't want to just say, oh yeah, this is the next Kawhi Leonard, because I won't say he's the next Kawhi Leonard, but when you look at his measurables, you look at his jump shot, when you look at just the way he plays, his college tape is similar to, I won't say the NBA tape, the college tape is similar to Kawhi Leonard. But that's neither here nor there. We'll talk more about Cedric Coward as the days and the weeks go on. But right now we're going to talk about what Zach Kleiman said. Zach Kleiman said a lot of things, quite frankly. We talked to him, I think, roughly for 15 minutes. If you remember, the last time we talked to Zach Kleiman was at exit interviews, and a lot has happened since exit interviews. And quite frankly, at exit interviews, we weren't able to ask him all of the pressing questions because there were so many questions to address about the future of this Grizzlies team. So the number one thing to point out is when Zach Kleiman came and spoke to the media, before he allowed anyone to ask any question, he showed his appreciation for Desmond Bane. He instantly said, look, we're grateful for what Desmond Bane did here. Desmond Bane was a player that Zach Kleiman was close to. If many of you remember, Desmond Bane is one of the first players who usually gets a call or a text from Zach Kleiman when the Grizzlies make a really big move. So Desmond Bane is right there in terms of guys who are always informed on what's going on with the Grizzlies, and they've always considered him as one of the members of the core. Jaren Jackson Jr., John Morant, and Desmond Bane. So getting to that part of the conversation, Desmond Bane was eventually not part of the core anymore, and now what you have is John Morant and Jaren Jackson Jr. Zach Kleiman talked about that, and what he said was, what we've kind of, alluded to and talked about. The Grizzlies are retooling. He used the word rebuild, but he was talking about it from the standpoint of not a rebuild like some of the bad teams in the NBA, but building the roster to be better equipped around John Morant and Jaren Jackson Jr. I think the simple way to put it is being better equipped to be around John Morant. Look, you got Ja, who's 6'2", 180 pounds or so. Teams are going to attack him. Last couple times we've seen the Grizzlies in the playoffs, you've seen teams say, hey, look, Ja is either smaller or he's a weaker defender. Let's go at him. But guess what? The Grizzlies are saying, okay, we're going to put quality defenders all around Ja Morant, and we're going to make it tough on you, because a lot of teams do that, right? Steph Curry wasn't necessarily guarded as a great defender during Golden State's dynasty run. But guess what? He was surrounded by Klay Thompson, quality defender, Andre Iguodala, quality defender, Draymond Green, quality defender, and so many more guys who are willing to do the dirty work on the defensive end. So it worked. And the Grizzlies can do just that with Ja Morant. But Desmond Bane, who I think you consider an average defender, he might not have some of the measurables and things like that, but he tries and he's going to give you effort. And, you're not going to just bully Desmond Bane, so to speak. But they need guys who you just can't score against. Guys who is like, man, I got to go against him. It's going to be a tough night. Like, I got to work tonight. They need more of those type guys. And you look in the roster before draft night, Jalen Wells, impossibles. Like, shout out to the spades players out there. When you're playing spades and you say, oh, I got two in a possible. Well, the Grizzlies got one in a bunch of possibles. John Conchard's a possible. Vince Williams, if he's healthy, that's another possible. Scottie Pippen Jr., he size disadvantage, but he's going to compete his butt off, so that's another possible. Like, you got a bunch of possibles, but by adding Cedric Coward, you get another guy. Okay, that's two. 38-inch vertical, 7'2.5" wingspan. The measurables are there. We haven't seen him much against high major competition, but the measurables are there. And this is what it looks like. Like, the signs are right there in terms of what the Grizzlies are doing to retool this roster around John Morant and Jaren Jackson Jr. They traded Desmond Bane, but they got Kentavious Caldwell-Pope back. Was that an accident? I don't think so. Kentavious Caldwell-Pope has been a great wing defender on championship teams. He was a great wing defender in Denver. He was a great wing defender with Los Angeles Lakers for both teams en route to their championships. Okay, that's him. Then yesterday, Zach Kleiman, when talking about the Desmond Bane trade, basically said that Jalen Wells was a significant reason why that happened. They trust Jalen Wells. And we've talked about another thing that we've talked about on the show. We're expected to see Jalen Wells move to the 2. More natural position. He's going to play the shooting guard. That's going to bring the best out of him on the offensive end. It's going to take him away from those bulkier guys that he struggled with. He was really good against some of the smaller guards in the league, guys who aren't, super big, so to speak. But he struggled a little bit when he had to play the Lucas and LeBrons. Would get in foul trouble, would foul them. So what? But guess what? Now you bring in a guy like Cedric Coward. Now you have Jalen Wells. You got Cedric Coward. You're hoping Vince Williams turns things around, with a full offseason, of help with Gigi Jackson. There's still, some belief there that, hey, look, the guy has all the tools in the world. He can be a standout defender for the Grizzlies. So all of that factored in, that is kind of where we view this team through the lens of Zach Kleiman. Another thing that Zach Kleiman said, and this caught the eyes of a lot of people. I'm not going to talk about it too much on today's show because I want to give my co-host, I want to give Joe Mullinax a chance to chime in on this. And here's the quote from Zach Kleiman. He said, if we're being honest with ourselves, we don't feel like we're one guy away from winning a championship. He said the Grizzlies are one guy away. So there are two ways to potentially take that statement, right? Some of you will say, man, Zach, are you telling me to pack it in for next season and just don't come to the games, don't watch the games? Like, what do you mean you're not just one piece away from winning a championship? Are you trying to concede defeat for next season? But some of you will say, he knows that we're not one guy away. So that means he's going to make multiple moves. So what's he got up his sleeve? And I'm going to say, time will tell. Time will tell what Zach Kleiman is cooking right now as the Grizzlies GM. So I'm looking forward to seeing, how free agency works out, how the extension talks go. He said that Jaren Jackson Jr. is a high priority. He said that Santi Aldama is someone that the Grizzlies would love to have back. So all things still stand how we've said previously on Locked On Grizzlies. Thank you for making Locked On Grizzlies your first listen today. For your second listen, find the Locked On NBA podcast where there is no offseason. Doug, Matt, and Hayes keep you up to date on contract negotiations, rumors, and everything you need to be the most informed NBA fan. Find Locked On NBA on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team each and every day. Thank you guys for tuning in to Locked On Grizzlies with me today. Tomorrow you'll be with Joe Mullinax. He's going to break down the second round of the NBA draft. He's going to break down his overall thoughts on the NBA draft and much more. We will not be talking to Zach Kleiman on tomorrow. The next time you hear us talking to people from the Grizzlies organization will be at the player introduction. So it's going to be Cedric Coward, and we're going to see who else will join him in those talks. But until then, remember that Locked On Grizzlies is free and available wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Damichael Cole, and we'll see you on Locked On Grizzlies.